The girl accidentally witnessed her parents' intimate behavior, and this left a deep psychological trauma on her. From that moment on, she developed a bone-deep fear and disgust toward physical intimacy. At the age of 8, and lived in a poor and deeply dysfunctional family. In Anne's memories, her mother dragged along a frail and sickly body while constantly giving birth to more children. Yet this pitiful woman did not dare to resist in the slightest. Her father, on the other hand, endlessly beat and cursed them, and the sounds of violence and humiliation echoed throughout Anne's entire childhood. In an era when even a 10-year-old child could face the death penalty for a mistake. In an era when women had no right or opportunity to speak at all. Anne's parents were consumed, one by making a living, and the other by bearing children. They had no idea how to love their own child in such an environment, and could only seek comfort in two places. One was her close bond with her younger brother William, and the other was her burning and unwavering faith. The power of this faith drove her to join an extremely devout sect known as the Shakers. This sect was called the Shakers because during their gatherings, they would tremble violently and perform dances resembling seizures. They believed that such ecstatic movements could cleanse the sins buried deep within the soul. Even as an adult, and could not escape the rules of society, she obeyed her parents' wishes and married a rough laborer. However, this worldly marriage did not bring happiness, but instead delivered a series of devastating blows. She gave birth to 4 children in succession, yet every one of them died before reaching the age of 1, and her husband had only one response: keep giving birth. She must continue. It was this relentless grief of losing her children, combined with her husband's commanding demands and his complete disregard for her physical condition, that became the turning point in Anne's life and faith. She interpreted this suffering as a revelation from God. In the end, she became convinced that reproduction and breastfeeding were the original sin, and the only barrier preventing humans from forming a true connection with God. After giving birth to her last child and declaring that she could no longer conceive, and chose a life of celibacy.
Marrying Jan is not a sin.
I have fallen under heavy trials and tribulations on account of lodging with my husband. It is sexual sin that has caused us to catastrophe, I know.
The idea of establishing the Shaker movement lingered constantly in her mind. She grew even more certain that every extraordinary path she had walked in this world was guided by God. She believed she was a child of God, but in the eyes of outsiders, they twisted, spun, jumped, beat their chests, and let out piercing cries as if their bodies were possessed by an invisible force. Because of this, they faced widespread criticism and complaints, and the authorities frequently suppressed their gatherings. Yet some believed that such behavior was simply the yearning of the lower classes, especially women, for spiritual liberation under extreme oppression, and was detained. But she, her brother, and a small number of followers firmly believed that the fallen old world could not accommodate their purity. They protested and tried every possible way to rescue Anne, but all attempts failed. Later, Anne contracted malaria in prison and appeared to have little hope of survival, so the guards finally sent her back to her relatives. But after her release, Anne fell into a deep sleep for 3 days and nights, and then miraculously recovered, having survived such a close brush with death, and became completely fearless. She grew even braver than before and continued to preach the beliefs of the Shakers in various places. She declared that reproduction was not a woman's only duty, and that maintaining bodily purity was the true path to a blissful world. She also hoped that more women would join her. This time, Anne was brought to court and subjected to a public trial by lawmakers, under pressure from the church at the time. After a lengthy 3-month trial, Anne was ultimately exiled and permanently forbidden from setting foot on the New World, and took her brother and a small group of her most loyal followers and boarded a ship to cross the Atlantic, heading for America. At that time, America was widely regarded as a utopia where everyone was equal, with no exploitation and no oppression. During the journey, they encountered a massive storm, and seawater nearly flooded the entire cabin. Fortunately, after a full night of desperate efforts, just as the ship was on the verge of sinking, the sea at dawn turned calm under bright sunlight and clear skies. After surviving against overwhelming odds, they finally arrived safely in New York. Everything here felt completely new to them. As they passed through the noisy streets, they gradually sensed that this land was filled with the smell of money. People were constantly busy, resorting to all kinds of cunning and deceit in pursuit of wealth. When they saw people of color being treated like livestock, standing on platforms and auctioned off by white men, they were shocked and furious, and could not help but loudly condemn it.
Shame! 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 Shame!
Shame! Shame!
With no money to their names, they urgently needed help. Years earlier, and had heard of a great philanthropist living in New York, and they went straight to find him. Fortunately, the philanthropist took them in and gave them their first full meal in 2 months. The philanthropist greatly admired Anne's courage, and he was even willing to purchase a piece of land upstream along the Hudson River for them to develop into a farm, planning to recover the cost gradually once it became profitable. The men set foot first on that desolate and scorching island, with abundant rainfall and fertile soil. Aside from the dangers posed by untamed inhabitants and constant threats, it was an ideal place for human settlement. Half a month later, Anne and all the believers arrived on the island. They began clearing large areas of farmland and repairing houses, breathing in the familiar scent of the island and looking at scenes that felt strangely recognizable, and seemed to have dreamed of this land many years ago. Everything felt as if it had long been destined. As they worked, they continued to spread the beliefs of the Shakers. The men often left the island to preach, and their group gradually grew stronger on this new land. They developed their own system of governance, achieving a perfect balance between building their home and nurturing spiritual belief. 3 years later, the land was no longer barren, but thriving with vitality. After 8 years, Anne had not only repaid the philanthropist's original support, but had also become a wealthy farm owner. Visitors from all directions came out of admiration, and Anne became the leader of the church. One day, a backpacker named Charlie arrived on the island, drawn by its reputation, but at the same time, he brought troubling news. War was approaching, and was also targeted by ill-intentioned journalists, who accused her of founding a dangerous sect that threatened the safety of America, and widely published these reports. Outsiders only saw the surface of this place. Here, Anne had taken in the poor from all races and social classes, and true equality existed, without hierarchy or discrimination. Hundreds of orphans were also rescued by Anne, and had created the utopia she had always envisioned in her heart. Over 10 years, every object on the island and every grain of food was produced by the hands of the believers. They were spiritually fulfilled and lived each day with optimism and purpose. But the day they feared finally arrived. A group of immigrants from New York and the New World stormed onto the land. They saw Anne as a witch and claimed they had come to purify America, violently destroying the believers' home.
Don't never build here! Got the light!
Surround Mother, protect her! Stay calm, children! What is it? God is with us!
Do not fight back, brothers! Where is she? Protect Mother Anne! Show us the witch!
Do not fight back!
This land is not yours. You shall never live here. You shall never build here.
You can't just let me go, Sir Brother William! Let me go! William!
Stop her!
William!
Grab the witch! Get down, you dog! Do not fight back, brothers! My sister!
Make haste!
A brutal massacre unfolded across this once sacred land. This devastating destruction caused Anne to lose everything in an instant. She also lost her beloved younger brother. Most of the believers were either killed or captured. They were forced to flee deep into the primitive forest to hide. The resilience of the women allowed them to take root once again in this harsh environment. By planting fruit trees, they lived quietly and in secrecy for decades. At the age of 48, Anne fell gravely ill and passed away from this world. The followers who had survived gathered once more and held a grand ceremony to return her to God. When overwhelming grief cannot be expressed, some choose silence, while others find spiritual comfort and go on to create a paradise meant to save all people. She used the faith in her heart to fight against fate, refusing to surrender, and in the end ignited a strange and enduring flame. Today, the Shaker movement has seen a sharp decline in numbers due to its advocacy of celibacy, but its call for women's equality, peace, and spiritual independence has echoed across 2 centuries and still resounds powerfully today.